I wasn't even supposed to be at the party. Bianca made that abundantly clear as we stepped out of the car. She didn't even look at me as she adjusted her diamond-studded clutch under her arm, her lips tight, her eyes already scanning the entrance of the Ashbourne estate like she was about to walk into a throne room instead of a party. "Just stay out of the photos. Don't embarrass me," she hissed without turning her head. The words were knives tucked beneath the silk of her voice, soft enough for the valet not to hear, sharp enough to leave a mark. The entrance to the estate shimmered under golden light. Men in tailored tuxedos escorted women who wore dresses like armor, sequins and satin swishing around manicured ankles. It reeked of prestige and whispers. Crystal chandeliers lit up the enormous ballroom like a Hollywood dream, and violins sang over the hum of conversations about stocks, mergers, and country clubs I'd never stepped foot in. I stayed near the edge, not out of shame, but because that's where I always ended up, on the outskirts of someone else's story. I knew how to blend into walls, to shrink inside my own skin, especially when Bianca was among her people. She glided through the room like a swan who'd forgotten she used to be a duck. No trace of the woman who'd once laughed at street tacos and sang off-key with the windows down. Now she was all posture and polish. She posed with her firm's partners, her hand on Marshall Cray's arm like she was auditioning for something grander. "You're just a cleaner, Milo," she'd whispered as we stepped into the ballroom, her voice so laced with ice that I wondered if she even felt it sting. "Let's not pretend you belong in this world." I laughed then, a short, dry sound that barely escaped my throat. Because it wasn't the first time she'd said something like that. It was just the first time she said it out loud, right there, like I was nothing more than a shadow that came attached to her heels. And maybe I was. For too long, I'd played the part of the invisible husband, the safe choice, the quiet placeholder. But I felt something stir in me that night, like the first ripple in still water. I just didn't know what it meant yet. So I stood by the waitstaff, sipping sparkling water and pretending I enjoyed being invisible. Then I heard it. The distinct growl of an engine slicing through idle chatter. Everyone heard it. A black McLaren 720S rolled up the drive, purring like some exotic cat let loose in a room full of dogs. Heads turned. Phones came out. Whispers rose like static electricity as people hurried to the massive glass doors to see who had just arrived. I didn't move. Not at first. I just watched. Something about the way people leaned toward the entrance, like iron pulled toward a magnet, made my spine straighten. The car door lifted up with the grace of a theater curtain, and out stepped a man dressed in a black suit so sharply tailored it looked like it had been sewn onto him. Silver hair swept back like a crown of ice, ice cutting through the night like headlights. His shoes gleamed. His presence was thunder-made flesh. He didn't stop to speak with anyone. He walked straight into the ballroom, his pace slow, deliberate, like he already owned the room and was just taking inventory. Silence spread like ink in water. Then, his eyes landed on me. "Milo," he called. Just that. One name. But it was a detonation. People turned. Not just heads, bodies. Champagne glasses froze midair. Even the violinist faltered on her note. Bianca, halfway through laughing at some joke from her colleague, snapped her head around so fast I thought she might hurt herself. Her face went from smug amusement to pale confusion in seconds. The man moved toward me with quiet command, his gaze never wavering. My lungs tightened. My hands felt too large, too visible. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. Not since I walked out of that boardroom with his final words chasing me down the hallway like a curse. And now here he was, in front of me, extending his hand like nothing had passed between us but time. "I've missed you, son," he said. He said it loud enough that everyone heard. He wanted them to hear. Every arrogant whisper melted into stunned silence. All those polished smiles turned brittle. I could feel Bianca staring at me, her mouth slightly open, frozen like a statue cracking under the pressure of too many truths. I hadn't told her. Not once in our 4 years of marriage. She'd never asked, and I never volunteered. To her, I was just Milo the cleaner. A quiet man with modest dreams and no past worth digging into. But now the past had walked into the room, dressed in $10,000 of custom fabric, and shattered her curated world in one sentence. I met my father's eyes, and I shook his hand. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. He walked in like he owned the air we breathed. The hush that fell over the ballroom wasn't forced, it was instinctive, like prey sensing a predator had entered the clearing. Conversations wilted mid-sentence, and even the string quartet faltered slightly, as if their bows forgot the rhythm when their eyes caught sight of him. The man with the silver hair, razor-sharp suit, and that unmistakable gravity wasn't just another powerful executive. He was Dorian Greystone, my father. Billionaire. founder of Greystone Technologies, the ghost I'd walked away from. And now, somehow, here he was, walking straight into the center of my fractured world like he'd never left it. His eyes scanned the sea of startled faces until they landed on mine. I felt that look in my marrow. It was the same look he gave me when I was a kid, after I'd done something that earned his rare approval, back when I still craved it like sunlight. Milo. His voice sliced clean through the awkward silence. Not loud, but potent. The kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to command attention. Heads turned in unison, eyes flicking between him and me like they were trying to solve a puzzle too complicated for words. I didn't move. Couldn't, really. My body rooted to the ground, my heart hammering like a war drum. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. No emails. No birthday cards. Nothing. I'd walked away from the Greystone legacy and the mountain of expectations that came with it. And I'd thought he'd let me go. Bianca's face was a painting in real-time confusion, disbelief, and then something darker. Her eyes darted to me like she was seeing me for the first time, really seeing, and not liking what it meant. Dorian walked toward me, each step unhurried but unwavering. The crowd parted around him like water around a ship's bow, people instinctively making room even if they didn't realize why. Some recognized him. Others whispered, asking each other who he was. And then someone gasped. A woman in a red dress turned to her date and said it. That's Dorian Greystone. The name dropped into the room like a grenade. Bianca's lips parted. Her hand, still holding her champagne glass, trembled slightly. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to compute how her husband, the man she routinely dismissed, could be connected to a titan like Dorian. He reached me and stopped. No hesitation. No drama. Just presence. His hand extended. I've missed you, son. The word echoed. Son. I didn't know what to say. I could feel 1,000 eyes burning into the back of my neck, my chest, my hands. The air thickened. Bianca took a step forward, her face a mask trying to hold itself together. You're his. Her voice cracked like glass under pressure. I looked at her, the woman who had spent years critiquing my shoes, correcting my grammar in front of her friends, and telling me not to speak too loudly when we were around her colleagues. And I said nothing. I just shook Dorian's hand. It was firm, familiar. There was a heat there I didn't expect, like he meant it. Like 5 years of silence were being forgiven with one touch. Bianca's boss, Marshall Cray, practically stumbled over himself as he rushed across the floor. I hadn't seen a man that rich look so desperate. Mr. Greystone, Dorian, this is an honor, he sputtered. I had no idea you'd be attending. Had I known, we would have arranged a formal introduction. Dorian didn't even look at him. I'm here for Milo, he said simply. And with that, the ground under everyone's feet seemed to shift. Here for Milo. Those 3 words rewrote the narrative the room had built around me. No longer just Bianca's quiet, low-ambition husband. Not the odd tag-along she avoided introducing. Not the cleaner. The room was now filled with a new kind of silence, charged, uncomfortable, reverent. People were recalibrating everything they thought they knew. About me. About Bianca. About what power looked like. Bianca opened her mouth again, then shut it. Her expression was hard to read. Part betrayal, part panic, and something else I'd never seen before. Fear. I looked at her and suddenly saw the entire structure of our marriage for what it had always been. She loved the version of me that was easy to dismiss. The man who wouldn't overshadow her. Who wouldn't challenge her. But she never asked who I was. Never thought to. Because to her, I was a blank canvas she could hang next to her ambitions. But now, the truth was out, and she had nowhere to hide. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. I hadn't told anyone, I said to Dorian, low enough for only him to hear. He nodded slightly. Didn't think you would. But it's time. Time for what? He smiled faintly. To reclaim your name. I didn't know what that meant yet. All I knew was that tonight, something had shifted. Not just in how they saw me, but how I saw myself. Not the cleaner. Not the embarrassment. I was Milo Greystone. And I was done hiding. I didn't sleep that night. After the ballroom cleared and the last of the champagne flutes were gathered by gloved hands, I found myself sitting at the edge of our bed, still in my suit. Bianca hadn't spoken since we got home. Not one word in the car. Just silence, cold and loud. She'd stormed into the bathroom the second we walked through the door, slamming it behind her like punctuation on the kind of rage that doesn't know where to go. I stared at the floor for a long time, fingers interlocked, heart still running the laps it had started when Dorian said my name in front of that crowd. Milo Greystone. I hadn't heard it spoken out loud in years, not like that. Not with weight. Not with purpose. I had buried that part of myself beneath sweat and bleach and long hours in janitor uniforms, telling myself I didn't need that world. Telling myself I was better off without it. And maybe I was. But now? Now, everyone knew. I remembered Bianca's face as the reality sank in, that the man she had belittled, controlled, and shoved to the margins wasn't the nobody she thought. She'd married a Greystone, and she hadn't even known. But the thing that kept ringing in my ears wasn't her gasp, or the whispering crowd, or even Dorian's words. It was something older. A memory. A voice from years back. Hers. "You're just a cleaner, Milo." She'd said it with such certainty, like she was declaring a truth carved in stone. Like she was disappointed I wasn't more, when in fact, I had always been more. I just didn't tell her. And the irony? That job was the one thing I had done entirely on my own. No legacy. No nepotism. No family name greasing the path. I chose it. I chose the quiet. The simplicity. The humility. Cleaning may not have earned me applause or status, but it was honest. Every scuffed floor, every trash bag, every mop stroke, it was mine. Bianca and I met during that time. She was sharp, ambitious, intimidating in her elegance. I remember how she looked at me the first time we spoke, like I was a novelty. "You're not like the other men around here," she had said, eyes scanning me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Back then, I mistook that for affection. Now, I know it was curiosity wrapped in convenience. She liked me quiet, predictable, safe. I was someone she could shape. A man without a pedestal or pedigree. She never asked about my past. Not really. Maybe she assumed I had nothing worth asking about. Maybe that's what she preferred. And I let her. I thought that kind of love, conditional and clean, was all I deserved. I didn't want to lead board meetings or give speeches. I wanted to disappear into the background and build something real. But something changed tonight. The moment Dorian walked into that room, the veil lifted. Not just for everyone else, for me, too. I realized I wasn't hiding from the world. I was hiding from myself. Because walking away from the Greystone Empire hadn't been about rebellion. It had been about fear. Fear that I would become like Dorian, ruthless, calculating, hollow behind all that power. But I wasn't him. I never had to be. And just maybe, there was a way to reclaim the crown without selling my soul. I stood up slowly, my joints stiff from sitting too long. I pulled off the jacket I had worn to the estate and stared at it draped across the back of a chair. Even it seemed different now. The door to the bathroom creaked open behind me. Bianca stepped out. Her hair was up, her makeup gone, but her eyes were sharp. "You lied to me," she said, voice low, not with sorrow, but fury. I turned to face her. I didn't lie. I just didn't share what I. The morning after the party, sunlight poured through the windows like it hadn't heard the world had changed. I stood in the kitchen of our high-rise apartment, pouring black coffee into a chipped mug, the kind Bianca hated me using when guests were over. She said it made us look low class. But I loved that mug. It was mine. I'd used it long before her. And somehow, it felt like the only honest thing in this place. The door to the bedroom opened behind me. I didn't turn. "Milo," she said carefully. The tone was rehearsed, smooth, but too even. She was trying to steady herself, trying to play normal. But I could hear the tremble beneath her words. I took a slow sip of my coffee, then glanced over my shoulder. She stood there barefoot, her silk robe cinched tightly around her, like she needed armor for the conversation ahead. "You never said you were that Greystone," she murmured, stepping into the kitchen like it was unfamiliar territory. I set the mug down. "Would it have changed how you treated me?" She blinked. For a moment, I thought she might answer. But her silence said more than any words could. I nodded slightly. That's what I thought. I didn't need her to say it. Her face at the party said enough. The shift in her body language the moment my last name became public knowledge. The way her voice caught when she said it. Greystone. Like it was suddenly sacred. Her boss, Marshall Cray, had come over during the chaos, practically crawling toward Dorian. I'd never seen a man turn to jelly so quickly. Marshall was the kind of man who treated you based on the car you drove and the title on your business card. When Dorian didn't shake his hand, only gave him a cool nod before saying, "I came for Milo," you could feel the tectonic plates in that ballroom shift. Everyone froze. All those people Bianca used to flaunt in front of me, coworkers, judges, partners, people who had looked through me like I was wallpaper, suddenly stopped breathing. And I looked at Bianca then. She was smiling for the crowd, that same plastic curve of lips she used in posed photos. But her eyes, they were flailing, drowning. And for the first time in our marriage, I saw her mask crack. That perfect, polished lawyer persona faltered under the weight of reality. I could have stayed silent, let the night play out like a drama on stage. But I'd had enough. So I turned to her, right there in front of everyone, and said it. You told me I didn't belong, that I was embarrassing. Her face drained of color. People gasped. Phones started recording. And I didn't care. I stepped back from her table, walked through the crowd like it wasn't made of the same people who'd ignored me just minutes before. Bianca didn't follow. She couldn't. Her legs wouldn't move. Her world had cracked open, and she didn't know how to close it. Now, in the silence of our kitchen, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. I didn't mean it like that, she said, voice hoarse. I didn't know. That's the problem, I said quietly. You never asked. She pressed her hands against the counter, gripping the edge like it was the only thing keeping her upright. So what? Now you're going to act like I'm the villain? No, I said. You don't need me to do that. You've written that role for yourself. She shook her head, and I saw the anger rise. Not grief, not remorse, just the panic of losing control. You let me believe you were a nobody. I let you believe what you wanted, I replied. I thought it didn't matter, that you'd see me for who I was. But you never really looked. There was a long silence between us, thick with all the things we never said. The lies we told each other in the name of love, or comfort, or fear. The mug steamed between my fingers. I didn't drink. I just held it. What did he mean? Bianca asked suddenly, straightening. Your father. When he said you're about to take over something important. I turned to face her fully. He wants me back. Wants me to rejoin the company. Sit at the board. Reclaim the family name. Her eyes lit with something primal. Desire, ambition, recognition. So, are you? I smiled. A small bitter thing. That's not what matters to you. What matters is whether I'm still the man you can control. Her jaw clenched. That's not true, isn't it? I asked. And then I walked past her. The same way I walked away from her at that table. Because it wasn't just about the name. It was about the way she looked through me when she thought I was beneath her. It was about the years I'd spent playing small so she could feel big. I stopped at the door. You married a cleaner, Bianca, I said without looking back. But you never bothered to ask what I used to be. Or what I could become. Then I left the apartment, not slamming the door, just closing it with the finality it deserved. 5 years ago, I walked out of the Greystone Tower with nothing but a duffel bag and a bitter taste in my mouth. That day is carved into my memory, sharp and immovable. The sun was setting behind the skyline, casting the glass facade of Greystone Enterprises in molten gold, like the building itself was gloating. My father's final words echoed behind me as I stepped into the elevator. You're throwing away everything. But to me, it felt like the first breath I'd taken in years. I wasn't running from wealth. I was running from the hollowness it demanded. The boardrooms were full of snakes and silk ties, everyone speaking in power plays and half-truths. I was being groomed to inherit that kingdom, Dorian Greystone's only child, raised with a silver spoon and an iron leash. But I didn't want to sit at a table where I had to be ruthless to be heard. I wanted to live a life that wasn't scripted by legacy or bloodlines. So, I left. I gave up the penthouse, the company car, the network of polished vultures who called themselves family friends. At 27, I became anonymous by design. I shaved off the last remnants of Greystone from my wardrobe, put on a generic uniform, and took a janitorial job at a downtown law firm. No one there knew my name, at least, not the full one. I was just Milo, a guy who kept his head down and his mop clean. That's where I met her. Bianca. She wasn't the woman she is now. Back then, she was still climbing. An associate, hungry for recognition, dazzling in her ambition. She walked through the office like a bullet looking for a target. But one night, late, when most of the floors were dark and I was pushing a trash cart through the maze of cubicles, she stopped. Looked at me. Really looked. You always clean in straight lines, she said, half smiling. Very methodical. I blinked, surprised. Most people never spoke to me unless they wanted to complain about something sticky on their desk. I guess it's easier to keep track that way, I'd replied. She leaned against a filing cabinet, still in her blazer and heels. You always this calm? Not always. But it helps. Something about that exchange stuck. She started lingering when I was around, asking small questions, laughing more than she needed to. And I, who had sworn off connections, found myself looking forward to those moments. I told myself it was okay, that I could have something real without the shadow of my last name stretching between us. She liked that I didn't talk about work, that I didn't flirt like the other men in the office, that I was simple, Predictable. Safe. At least, that's what she thought. We started dating. Slowly at first. Coffee on her lunch breaks. Dinner in quiet spots where no one knew her name. She introduced me to her friends as someone in maintenance, and I didn't flinch. I let her believe I had no history worth discussing. I wanted her to love the man I chose to be, not the man I used to be. It worked. For a while. She moved in after 6 months. Proposed after a year. I remember thinking, maybe this is the life I'm meant to build. Quiet. Steady. One where no one bows when I walk into a room. But cracks started forming. Subtle at first. Comments about my wardrobe. My silence at parties. Her irritation when I didn't want to network. She started pushing me to aim higher. Said things like, I know you're smart, you just need more drive, as if ambition was the only valid currency. She thought she could mold me. Turn me into someone who matched her trajectory. And every time I stayed quiet, every time I nodded instead of pushing back, I saw her look at me with a mix of frustration and disappointment. And I let it happen. Because part of me was still ashamed. Still afraid that if I reached back toward who I used to be, I'd lose the man I had fought to become. But last night changed that. Seeing her face when Dorian said my name, it wasn't just shock. It was betrayal. Not because I lied, but because the man she thought she'd sculpted had sculpted himself long before she arrived. Because I didn't need her ladder, I had chosen the ground. Now, sitting in a cafe on the edge of town, I stirred my coffee absently and stared out the window. The world outside moved fast, cars honking, people laughing, life happening in the messy, unpredictable way it always does. And I sat there, wondering how I had ever thought that hiding who I was made me stronger. I'd spent years trying to vanish, trying to rewrite myself without the ink of my past. But identity doesn't work that way. You don't get to erase the foundation just because you want a different view from the window. I didn't regret leaving Greystone, but I did regret shrinking. And maybe that's what this was all about. Not reclaiming power, but reclaiming space. The door to the cafe chimed. A couple walked in, laughing, holding hands. They didn't look rich or important, just happy. I smiled faintly and took a sip of my coffee. It was time to stop apologizing for who I was. Not for Dorian, not for Bianca, just for me. The Ashbourne estate loomed in the evening light like some carved-out memory from my past, ornate, unbothered by time, dipped in old wealth and guarded by men in tailored suits who opened doors without smiles. I wasn't sure why I came back. I told myself it was to settle the air. Maybe to tie off the night before with something less volatile than the explosion I left behind. Maybe curiosity. But deep down, I knew. Dorian had summoned me, and I was always going to answer. The estate hadn't changed. Still cold in its grandeur. Still echoing with the ghost of my childhood. I'd grown up here, tucked into its sprawling halls and marble floors. And yet, it never felt like home. More like a museum I wasn't allowed to touch. Everything was sharp, quiet, and too polished to breathe in. Dorian was waiting in the west wing, the study, of course. It was always his command post. Books lined the walls in rich mahogany, though I knew half of them were for show. He only read the ones about power, Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, case studies on hostile takeovers and market wars. He didn't look up when I walked in. He was pouring 2 glasses of scotch, his movements slow and exact. He always had that calm, measured presence, like he was playing chess on a board only he could see. Still prefer bourbon? I said flatly. He smirked, placing 1 glass down on the table. Some things don't change. I remained standing, watching him. You sent for me. He finally looked at me, and for a brief second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not regret. Never that. But maybe something close to acknowledgement. You made quite the entrance last night, he said. That was your idea, I replied. You walked in and dropped my name like a bomb. He took a sip of his drink, unfazed. It was time. I stepped closer, folding my arms. Why now, Dorian? 5 years of silence, and suddenly you show up at a corporate party in front of Bianca, in front of her entire firm? That wasn't about me. That was about making a statement. He didn't deny it. No one ignores a Greystone, he said. And when they do, they're reminded. My stomach tightened. That was the world he lived in. Everything was leverage. Everything was optics. Even me. I left for a reason, I said. You told me I was walking away from everything. I told you I wanted something different. You proved your point, he said smoothly. You went and played invisible. Scrubbed floors. Wore uniforms. Lived modestly. You found what you were looking for. And now you want me back? I asked. Why? He walked toward the fireplace and rested 1 hand on the mantel. Because the company needs you. The board is tired. They've been bickering over growth strategies while the world passes us by. They need new blood, someone with vision. Someone with the Greystone name. Someone who isn't afraid to shake the table. You think that's me? He turned to face me fully. I think you're the only one who hasn't tried to turn the company into a reflection of themselves. That makes you dangerous in the right way. I paced, trying to breathe through the surge of memories. The endless meetings. The pressure to outperform every expectation. The way Dorian would watch me as if testing my resilience with every sentence. I'm not interested in playing by your rules, I said. Then rewrite them. I paused. He walked closer, lowering his voice. The board is yours if you want it, Milo. All of it. I'll step back. I'm not here to control you. I'm here because I've watched from a distance and realized, maybe you were right to walk away. But now I'm asking you to come back. Not as my son. As the man who made them all look like fools last night. The room went still. He meant it. At least, I believed he did. I stared at the glass of scotch on the table but didn't touch it. My mind swirled. I had imagined 1,000 versions of this moment over the years. In most, I told him off. In a few, I walked out again. But none of those fantasies prepared me for this version, where he handed me the kingdom with open hands. No, I said quietly. Not the board. Not yet. His brow lifted. Then what? I met his gaze. I want something else first. My voice. My story. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. I turned toward the window, watching the distant ballroom below still glowing with leftover glamour from the night before. I could see silhouettes moving, staff resetting for the next event. Life resuming, unaware of the tectonic shift in the halls above. Tonight, I'm going to speak, I said. Not for you. Not for them. For me. Dorian picked up his glass. Then make it count. I left the study without finishing the scotch, my heart pounding with clarity I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what came next. I wasn't sure if I'd take the company or burn it all down. But I did know this. Before I reclaimed the name, I had to reclaim the truth. My truth. Bianca would be waiting below. And this time, I wouldn't walk in quiet. I'd walk in as the man they never saw coming. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, my fingers curled around the smooth mahogany banister, my breath caught somewhere between fear and resolve. The ballroom below had begun to hum again, the music returning to its polished flow, conversations resuming, albeit tinged with curiosity and unease. They'd seen the spectacle the night before, Dorian Greystone walking into their curated world and calling me son loud enough to echo through careers and reputations. But tonight, I was here not as a shadow. I was here to speak. Dorian stood off to the side, flanked by a few old board members who had no idea why they'd been summoned. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, tracking every movement, every twitch of attention like a conductor waiting for the downbeat. He gave me a small nod, silent permission, or perhaps silent challenge. I stepped forward, the hush growing as I moved to the center of the landing. The music faded again, slower this time, like it recognized what was coming. Conversations stopped like dominoes. Glasses hovered in midair. Dozens of faces turned upward, and all their carefully guarded expressions twisted into questions. Bianca stood near the bar, surrounded by her firm's top brass. She wore her pain in layers, flawless makeup, stiff posture, that controlled smile she used in courtrooms when opposing counsel landed a blow. Her eyes locked on mine, sharp and wary. She didn't know what I would say. No one did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet settled on the room like snowfall. Some of you know me as Bianca's husband, I began. Or maybe you don't know me at all. Maybe I was just the man who stood by the wall, out of focus in your photos, easy to forget. There was a flicker of recognition on a few faces. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others looked curious, amused. I'm the one who carried coats, who offered to take photos at your parties, who cleared empty glasses from tables when the servers were slow. I didn't mind. I told myself I liked the quiet, that I belonged in the background. A few nervous chuckles floated up, unsure whether they were allowed. I leaned forward slightly, letting my words draw them in. But before all that, I was just Milo. Not the cleaner, not the husband, just Milo. And I liked who he was. He didn't have to prove anything. I could feel it now, eyes widening, some already realizing where this was going. I took a breath, the kind that dug into my ribs. And yes, I'm Dorian Greystone's son. There it was, the gasp. Audible. Some hands went to mouths. Others whispered. Some heads swiveled toward Bianca, who stood frozen, expression unreadable. But let me be clear, I said, my voice hardening just enough. I didn't come back to wear that name like armor. I'm not here to wield it like a weapon. I'm not here because I suddenly crave your attention. I turned, letting my gaze scan the room, taking in the faces of the people who had once dismissed me. I remembered each one. The partner who told Bianca I was too quiet to be interesting. The senior associate who asked if I worked security. The judge who talked over me at the last charity gala, assuming I had nothing worth contributing. I watched how you treated me when you thought I was nobody. When you believed I had no pedigree, no name, no value. I watched you ignore me, patronize me, laugh behind my back. I let the silence grow teeth. I don't need your apologies. I don't even need your respect. What I needed was to say this, to remind every one of you that the person sweeping your floor might just own the building you stand in, that your titles, your suits, your practice smiles don't define anyone but you. I turned to Bianca then, and the room turned with me. You had a partner, I said quietly. Someone who loved you, who stood by you even when you made him feel small. But you didn't want a partner. You wanted a project. You wanted someone you could shape into your idea of success. Someone you could show off like a trophy you'd molded. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. You didn't fail me, Bianca, I said. You failed yourself. There it was. The final break. Her mask cracked just enough for the room to see. She looked away, blinking hard, her hand trembling slightly as it reached for her wine glass. I looked out again at the crowd. Some were visibly moved, others stunned. A few looked defensive, but all of them were listening. I stepped back from the railing, my heart thudding in my chest like a drum. I could have waited for applause. Some people were already starting to clap. I could have basked in that shift, the redemption arc, the sudden validation. But that wasn't what this was for. So I didn't wait. I didn't smile. I didn't bow. I just turned and walked away. Because this wasn't my coronation. This was my freedom. Milo, please, wait. Her voice rang out across the estate's massive driveway, but I didn't stop, not immediately. The night air was cool against my face, sharp with the scent of freshly watered hedges and polished stone. My steps echoed off the marble walk like defiance. But her voice, trembling and unfamiliar in its desperation, still managed to wrap itself around my spine. I paused beside a marble pillar, the car waiting just down the steps. Dorian stood near the rear passenger door, arms folded, watching. No words. Just presence. I turned, slow, measured. Bianca stood at the top of the steps, breathless, heels forgotten in one hand, her other gripping the railing as if it could steady the wreckage unraveling inside her. You said everything in front of everyone, she whispered, descending the steps now. You just walked up there and destroyed me. I arched an eyebrow. Destroyed you. Her jaw clenched. You embarrassed me. You humiliated me. I let out a short, hollow laugh. No, Bianca. You did that to yourself. I just told the truth. She stopped a few feet from me, barefoot on cold stone, eyes glassy with something she wasn't used to showing vulnerability. Maybe. Or shame. Hard to tell with her. If I'd known who you were, she started. And that was it. That was the mistake. I held up a hand. That's the problem. You only care now. After the name. After the reveal. But when I was just Milo, the quiet man who made your coffee, who didn't talk much at parties, who didn't fit your curated image, you didn't care what I felt. You cared about how I looked next to you. Whether I matched the furniture. She flinched. I didn't mean to make you feel like that. No, I said softly. You meant to make me feel small. You just didn't think I'd ever stand tall enough to call you out on it. She looked like she wanted to fight, to throw every memory between us like a weapon. But nothing she said would change the truth. When she thought I had no power, she dismissed me. And now that she knew I had more than she ever imagined, she wanted to rewrite the script. I tried, she whispered. I tried to make it work. I did everything to build a life for us. I tried, she whispered. I tried to make it work. I did everything to build a life for us. No, Bianca. You built a life for yourself. I was just a prop in it. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold, but the night was mild. Is this really it? She asked. After everything? I glanced toward the car. Dorian hadn't moved, but he was watching us closely. I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He'd had his own public fractures, his own moments of walking away from people who didn't see him. Maybe this time he understood mine. I looked back at Bianca. This isn't about revenge. I'm not here to punish you. I've woken up. For years, I thought playing small was the price of peace. But it wasn't peace. It was erasure. A tear slipped down her cheek, but I didn't reach for her. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't even feel angry. I felt finished. I don't hate you, I said gently, but I don't need to be understood by someone who only saw value when I came with a title. She took a step forward, reaching for my hand, but I stepped back. I hope you figure out what you're really looking for, I said, because I know now it wasn't me. The silence that followed was heavier than the speech I gave. It was finality, and maybe, in a way, mercy. I walked to the car. Dorian opened the door without a word. I slid in, and we pulled away, the lights of the estate shrinking in the rearview mirror like a scene I no longer belonged to. Inside the car, Dorian finally spoke. That felt good, didn't it? I didn't answer right away. I stared out the window, watching trees blur past in moonlight. It felt necessary, I said. He nodded once. Still not ready to come back? I turned to face him. No, but I'm thinking about something else. He raised an eyebrow. Oh, I don't want to inherit Greystone, I said. I want to build something of my own. Something that doesn't come with your ghosts. Or your rules. A slow smile spread across his face, rare and approving. Now that, he said, sounds like a Greystone. I shook my head. No, it sounds like me. We didn't speak much after that. Just rode in the silence of a night that had cleared the air like a storm. The next chapter hadn't started yet, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to turn the page. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when the letter arrived. No fanfare, no courier with silk gloves or urgent signature request, just a simple white envelope slipped through my mail slot, nestled between two bills and a takeout menu. But the moment I saw the handwriting, my chest tightened with a familiarity I hadn't felt in years. Aunt Margot. She had always written in graceful loops, each letter delicate yet deliberate, like she cared about the paper as much as the message. She was my father's younger sister, the only member of the Greystone family who hadn't treated me like a disappointment for walking away. When I left everything behind 5 years ago, she didn't scold or shame me. She just said, when you're ready to speak, I'll be here. And she kept her word, never pressed, never intruded. I opened the envelope carefully, like it was something sacred. The first line hit me before I even read the rest. You always had dignity, Milo, even when they tried to take it. I sat down at the edge of my kitchen table, the early morning light casting soft streaks across the paper. The kettle clicked off behind me, forgotten. Her letter continued, warm and steady, the way she always sounded when she wrapped her arms around you. I saw the footage, the speech, the look on their faces when they realized they had been standing next to greatness all along and never noticed. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. You didn't shout. You didn't throw punches. You just stood there and made them listen. That's the Greystone I always believed you'd become. I felt something shift in my chest. Not pride. Not sadness either. Maybe it was relief. Validation. The kind that doesn't come from applause, but from someone who loved you before you were anything at all. You don't need revenge, Milo. You don't need to prove anything. You already did. By surviving with your soul intact. That's more than most of us can say. She ended with a simple wish that I take whatever came next and shape it with my own hands. I read the letter 3 times, folded it back with a kind of reverence. Then I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. The video had gone viral. I hadn't posted it, but someone at the party had. 2 angles. Clean audio. My name trending by morning. The press labeled me the cleaner prince. Talk shows speculated on my marriage, my family, my next move. My inbox flooded with inquiries, journalists, investors, influencers who suddenly wanted to know the man behind the mop and the mansion. I ignored most of it. What mattered was the letter. It reminded me why I left in the first place, not just to escape Dorian's empire, but to find my own identity. And I had. Not in some grand inheritance, but in the quiet choices, in the grit, in the refusal to become what they expected. Later that day, Dorian called again. You've made an impression, he said without greeting. Even I couldn't have spun it better. I could hear the edge of amusement in his voice. For Dorian, everything was a chessboard. But for once, I didn't feel like a piece. I don't want Greystone, I said again. There was a pause on the line. I know. You've said that. I meant it. I don't want to fix what's broken. I want to build something better. He didn't argue. That was new. What are you thinking? He asked. I looked out my window at the city skyline. Not from the top floor of a tower, but from the modest loft I'd kept even after everything. It felt more honest than the penthouse ever did. I'm thinking. Civitas. Latin, Dorian mused. For citizens. Fitting. I want to create something focused on people. Real people. Ethical development, social housing, inclusive design. Something that actually serves communities, not just shareholders. Dorian was silent for a beat. That's ambitious. It's necessary. Another pause. Then, you'll need backing. Connections. I have those now. Whether I wanted them or not. There was a trace of pride in his voice when he replied. You always were a builder, Milo. Even when you thought you were just escaping. We didn't say goodbye. We never really did. But that call felt like closure. A bridge between who I was and who I chose to be. Over the next few weeks, I sketched ideas. Met with urban planners. Talked to former janitors, day laborers, single parents, people who were too often left out of the conversation. And I listened. That was the biggest shift. I didn't walk in with answers. I walked in with questions. What do you need? What do you wish someone had built for you? And Civitas began to take shape, not just as a company, but as a philosophy. I didn't need to wear a suit every day or sit at a mahogany desk to feel powerful. I didn't need to be introduced as Dorian Greystone's son. I had built credibility the long way around, step by quiet step. One morning, I pinned Aunt Margot's letter on the corkboard above my desk, not as a reminder of the past, but as a compass for the future. This wasn't about legacy anymore. This was about purpose. 6 months later, I stood in front of the tall glass entrance of Civitas Group's headquarters, a building that hadn't existed a year ago, not even on paper. The morning sun gleamed off the steel and stone, catching on the bold letters etched into the front lobby wall. Civitas Group, built with people, for people. Beneath it, the hum of real purpose thrived, phones ringing, ideas traded across coffee mugs, hope stitched into every fiber of the company culture. This wasn't Greystone. It wasn't built on stock values or boardroom power plays. It was built on something stronger: honesty, service, and second chances. People like Rosa, who used to clean hotel floors while attending night school, now led our facilities department. Or Jamal, who had once been homeless and now oversaw our housing initiatives. I hadn't just hired people who were overlooked. I empowered them. I didn't want employees who were mirrors of polished resumes. I wanted people who had fallen and gotten back up, who knew the cost of being underestimated. People like me. And as I walked through the double doors and into the open atrium, I couldn't help but feel it. This wasn't just a company. It was redemption carved into concrete. Bianca had sent her 4th email that week. Another apology. Another letter filled with regrets. I hadn't replied to a single one. Not because I hated her, but because I had nothing left to say. I didn't need her understanding. Her validation was no longer currency in my world. What mattered was that I finally saw myself clearly. And I liked the man staring back. I headed toward the main conference room where the team was setting up for our investor roundtable. But before I reached the door, the receptionist, Marcy, young and bright-eyed, called out softly, "Mr. Greystone, you have a visitor." I turned. Dorian stood in the entryway, flanked by 2 of his ever-present assistants, but noticeably subdued. No suit today, just a dark blazer, slacks, and an unfamiliar expression that wasn't quite pride, but not the usual guarded assessment either. He stepped forward, alone. "I never thought I'd see you build something like this," he said, looking around the space like he was seeing the future painted in living color. I nodded, crossing my arms loosely. "It's not Greystone." "No," he said. "It's better." That surprised me. Dorian never complimented unless it came wrapped in agenda. But today, he looked different. Older, maybe. Softer, in a way. "I thought legacy had to be forged in steel and ruthlessness," he said, glancing at the Civitas mission plaque on the wall. "But maybe it's built in listening. In humility. You taught me that. Without trying to." "You taught me too," I said, voice even. "Just not in the way you meant to." He nodded, accepting that without flinching. That was new. We walked through the space together, past the creative lab where community housing designs were being prototyped, past the co-working pods where formerly incarcerated citizens were now re-entering the workforce with pride. Dorian watched everything like a man peering into another universe. One he didn't build. One he never would have thought to. "Do you miss it?" he asked finally. "The old world." I shook my head. "Not for a second." He gave me a tight smile. "I tried to make you a king by inheritance. You became one through conviction." I was wrong, Milo. I hadn't waited my whole life to hear that. But now that he said it, it mattered more than I expected. "Thanks for coming," I said. "I didn't come to offer a deal," he said quickly, "or stake a claim. I came because I wanted to see what my son built. And to say, well, I'm proud of you." We stood there in silence, The sound of laughter and typing and life unfolding all around us. No titles. No expectations. Just two men, father and son, reconciling not through forgiveness, but through recognition. After he left, I walked into the conference room. The team looked up from their screens and whiteboards. "You ready, boss?" Rosa asked. I nodded. Let's show them what real change looks like. The meeting went well. Investors responded not just to numbers, but to vision. And not a single one asked about my last name. They asked about our mission, our people, our story. Later that evening, as I stood by the large office window watching the sunset over the city, I reflected on everything it had taken to get here. All the floors I had cleaned, all the nights I doubted myself, all the words that had been used to shrink me. They could mock the cleaner. They could look past the man in a uniform, but they couldn't ignore the king I had become. Not because I wore a crown, but because I never needed one.